And now we're ready to go. Thank you all for coming. It's lovely to have you here. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name's Allison Davies. I'm a former neurologic music therapist. So I was a registered music therapist in Australia for 16 years. And I deregistered from the allied health industry 5 or so years ago because I felt very much that I was ready to lean into a focus more around socio-cultural change. So rather than doing therapy with clients and supporting people to fix, develop, grow, change therapeutically, I wanted to be part of a larger story that attempts to shift and change and alter the structures that are causing the harm in the first place. And this is inherent to the neuro-affirming model and the neurodiversity paradigm, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. Um, so let's do this. I want to let you know also that the information that I'm going to share today is evidence-based. Now, evidence-based used to mean academia, and that was it. It came from a textbook, from a professor, from academic literature, and if it didn't, it wasn't evidence-based. That has all changed. Evidence base includes lived experience. And I'm not making this stuff up. There is like in psychology in Australia, as of December this year, it is a requirement that for best practice, you must include lived experience in your professional development and as part of your evidence base. So I'm siphoning information through that is coming through academia, that is coming through literature and research, although a lot of the research comes on the back of lived experience and sort of community consensus, because typically researchers aren't asking the right questions when it comes to neurodivergence. They're looking at causes and cures. And the neurodivergent community will say, well, this is my experience, this is my experience, this is my experience. And when enough people are saying this is our experience, then the academics come and research it. So it's really, really important to tune into the lived experience and the community consensus of of what is going on for us and what we need. So I'm taking information today from academia, including stats and data, lived experience, community consensus, and my own professional experience as well, which is part of my lived experience. I also want to acknowledge that all of the information, all of my own perception, and all of my interpretation is siphoned through my own personal privilege. I am holistic passing, which means that you would not automatically know that I was autistic and ADHD. So I have lived the privilege of not uh, being burdened by the discrimination that other children who grew up in the 80s like me would have been dealt just by being visibly, audibly, or more obviously autistic. I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm highly educated with lots of years at uni. I've had an official diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And whilst this is not necessary at all, it has afforded me in certain situations credibility that probably and would not be there, especially from non-neuro affirming service providers and GPs, doctors, etc., had I self-identified. And this is not to say that you shouldn't self-identify. It's valid. We will get there. But I wanted to say that everything I share today, even when I open up to the nuance of other people's experience and speak to the importance of learning from intersectional folk, um, still everything comes through my own perception. Um, to that end, I also want to say that I'm never here to say everything I say is true and right, because I'm someone who really leans into the philosophy and the inquiry and walk a pathway. I like to say I'm walking the pathway of the neuro-affirming and trauma-informed ways of being. And so they're moving, but I'm not saying this is fact. I don't feel comfortable with that. So please know that everything we're talking about now for the rest of the night is coming through all those filters. Right. How to be neuro-affirming when no one ever taught us how. By virtue of our age, I'm assuming that we probably don't have teenagers here. So by virtue of our age, we grew up in a time where the world was not neuro-affirming. So we did not get taught how. And we are learning right now out of necessity. We are one of the first generations of people not to have been brought up in a behavioral paradigm. We're one of the first generations of people to have neuroscience, which really only advanced in the 90s. We're one of the first generations of people to know anything about the nervous system and to know what we now know about trauma, because what we previously believed about trauma was that it was caused by a traumatic experience. And if we could resolve the traumatic experience, trauma would be gone. We know now that that isn't how it works. So we are one of the first generations of adults who really have access to information that takes us beyond what generation before generation before generation of parents and educators and therapists and doctors previously had, which is very exciting, but it requires of us a lot of unpacking, a lot of unlearning and relearning, and a lot of very vulnerably accepting that we can be wrong. And I will be the first to say, as a therapist of many years, I was wrong in many ways. And the reasons I were wrong was mostly because we didn't have the knowledge then that we have now. And I can look back and go, ooh, that isn't what I do now. But that's the way of it for all of us. So there is absolutely no need to shame ourselves or think that we harmed or layer on the guilt, because we are here walking a neuro-affirming path and doing the best we can consistently. But to really understand what neuro-affirming even means, I want to explain a few definitions to you. First, God, dropping my notes. First, neurodiversity. Now, neurodiversity was a word coined by Judy Singer in the 90s, I believe. Neurodiversity is a word that basically describes the natural diversity of brains. So I think the definition is something like the normal variation in human brain types. So neurodiversity means that it is expected that all the human brains in the world will be different. When we truly understand and embody this as truth, that it is expected that all the brains will be different, that it is expected that there will be a natural variation, a natural diversity of brain types in the world. When we truly embody that, it makes it impossible for us to lean into the idea that a neurotype can be a disorder, because there is no correct brain. There's no right brain. There's no like superior brain and lesser brains that if we work on well enough might start to look like the superior brain, which is what we used to think. So believing and understanding neurodiversity by the very nature of its definition completely catapults us away from everything we used to know about brains and disorders. And, you know, even the words developmental delay. If it's expected that there's all different brain types, it's not a delay. There's so many different words that we use. You know, we still have D's at the end of things, ASD, ADHD. The D is not is no longer needed. And I look forward to the day when these neurotypes are sort of altered, the names are altered, so we don't have to use the Ds at the ends of them. And I certainly don't use the word ASD. There's no need to use ASD anymore. Just use the word autism. You will find acronyms like ASD in the files and the documents. And wherever you see someone using ASD, you can just reply with, well, they can use ASD, you can use autism. It's very, very easy to move out of using the Ds for disorder. And every time we divest from something like that, we're being neuro-affirming. It's very, very, very simple. We don't have to have huge framework shifts to be neuro-affirming people. Understanding and truly embodying and believing that there is a natural variation in brain types makes us neuro-affirming. And when we act on that in very simple ways, we are being neuro-affirming. So I just want to add in there because this gets to me. A lot of people say, I'm neurodiverse. My kid is neurodiverse. My student is neurodiverse. I found out I'm neurodiverse. Neurodiverse does not describe a person. So the definition of neurodiverse refers to the natural variation or diversity in brain types. So it's a plural. Your family can be neurodiverse. The school, the classroom, the workplace can all be neurodiverse, but one person can't be neurodiverse. So if you're someone who is going, I have a neurodiverse client or I have a neurodiverse child, it's time to stop using that word. And I assume what you're referring to is neurodivergent. So neurodivergent is a word coined by Cassiana Assasimus. Sorry for pronouncing that incorrectly. This word was coined around the year 2000, so following the word neurodiversity. Neurodivergent is a socio-political term. It is not a diagnosis. So it's like an umbrella term, and Sunny Jane Wise refers to this and educates around this really incredibly and very thoroughly. If you think of neurodivergent as an umbrella, all of the things that can exist within that umbrella are all the multiple and varied ways in which our brain can diverge. So neurodivergent isn't just for the people whose neurotypes are like autism, ADHD, dyslexic, dysgraphic. Neurodivergent is anyone whose brains diverge from what we call neuronormativity, and I'll get to that word next. So someone with dementia, someone with depression, bipolar, there are someone who's menopausal. There are so many ways in which, and so many things that can impact our functioning and the capacity of our brain functioning in ways that would lead people to identify as neurodivergent. And there can be no gatekeeping on who is and who isn't neurodivergent. It's an identity. Anyone can identify as neurodivergent, and it can be innate or inherent, such as an autistic person, because our brain type is genetic, it's inherent, it's always there, it's never going to change. We will be autistic from the moment we're born and through our whole life. Or it can be acquired. You know, someone might actually literally have an acquired brain injury, and so they become neurodivergent. We can be multiply neurodivergent. There can be lots of reasons why we identify as neurodivergent, but it is not something that can be diagnosed because it's not an actual thing. So if you go and have a diagnosis and you get diagnosed or officially identified as autistic, for example, saying I've been diagnosed as neurodivergent or my child has been diagnosed as neurodivergent is an incorrect use of that word as well. So I think it's important to use the words neurodiverse and neurodivergent the way they were intended, because they're both such powerful concepts. They both mean different things. And it's very important that neither of those definitions like slide away. or fade out because we're using them incorrectly. We all know the neurotype is just the type of brain we have, but I want to come back to that word neuro and neuronormative. Neuronormativity is this idea of this like normal, the average, the mainstream. And for the most part, a neurodivergent brain diverges from what we call neuronormativity. So if we think of this in a circle here as the normal or the expected, the expectations given to us by a capitalist, patriarchal, very highly systemized civilization that we live in, where we have to conform a particular way, we have to work and contribute a particular way, we have to pay taxes, we have to be economic, we have to be considered meeting standards. All of the standards that we adhere to belong to what we call neuronormativity. And anyone who doesn't easily fit into this life diverges from it. So a neurodivergent person is someone who cannot easily meet the expectations of neuronormativity. We live within a neuronormative world. We live in a way, many of us live in a way where we're expected to work, we're expected to go to school, we're expected to do things that neuronormativity asks of us. And because we're neurodivergent, that is very difficult. So it is difficult for me to be in a highly sensory place, sensory overwhelming. It's hard for me to wear particular clothes. But if neuronormativity asks that we wear a uniform or a school uniform, for example, and then we have a sensory need that says, no tie, no woolen skirt touching our knees, no socks and shoes, then it means that fitting into neuronormativity uses up our energy, uses up our capacity, makes us feel like, why is it so hard? Why is it all so hard? And it can lead us to overwhelm, and it can alter our sense of self, and it can be quite damaging. So neuronormativity is the word that we use to refer to all these systems and structures and expectations, and some of them are internal expectations, our own internal desire to fit in. But as we know, fitting in is the opposite of belonging. And spending our life trying to fit in, even though it can bring us benefits in many ways, it can be really, really, it can be traumatizing, and it can lead to burnout and breakdowns of relationships and a lacking of a sense of safety and relational safety with people. So all of these terms are really important. And then the term neuro-affirming in itself is short for neurodiversity affirming. So when we understand that neurodiversity refers to the natural diversity of brains, we really believe that. Neurodiversity affirming means we act on that truth. We alter our approach, the way we support our kids, ourselves, our students, our clients, alters based on the fact that we no longer believe that our brains can be disordered or delayed or any of the other words we use to describe outdated perspectives of the lesser brain. So neurodiversity affirming requires of us to understand and really trust in and believe the concept of neurodiversity. It does not mean we have to be positive. And I think this is important because a lot of people who have really challenging lives and they're struggling and they're physically unwell and everything's hard and they don't feel good about themselves. That does not mean that you are not neuro-affirming. Affirming in this way does not mean we're just being positive about our neurotype. Affirming means we are accepting it. that it's not a disorder, that it's not a problem, that it's not inherently pathological, that it doesn't need changing or fixing inherently. It might need changing to make life easier for us, but it doesn't need changing just because it exists. So we don't have to be affirming, as in positive. We just have to be neurodiversity affirming. Now, if we're looking at the different ways that we can be neuro-affirming, I think there's three different elements that we need to address in this order. Firstly, we need to independently seek professional development because no one is teaching us this stuff unless we are seeking it. All of you who are watching this now have come to it because you are motivated to learn this. This is not being learned. This is not being taught at uni, not being taught at TAFE, not being taught by doctors. It's not being taught. More and more textbooks books are being written by autistic people and neurodivergent people. Not, I use the word autistic a lot because that is my neurotype, but because I'm talking about neurodiversity, this applies to all of the different ways in which brains can diverge. So please, if I say autism, know that I'm using that word because it's my own experience and I use that word just flies out often. But this is all relevant to all different neurodivergences, all the reasons anyone would identify as neurodivergent. We're not learning this within neuronormativity. The systems, the structures, the educating bodies are not teaching us about neurodiversity. So we have to independently seek it out. And this is a big ask. And so it's a huge deal that you're here learning about this. Please learn about neurodivergence from neurodivergent people, because if you're learning it through a textbook, even if it was once revered as being like gold star standard 15 or 20 years ago, it's no longer gold star standard. Learning about neurodivergence from a person who doesn't identify as neurodivergent is like learning about childbirth from someone who hasn't had a baby. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So please access information. There is so much available, podcasts, books, more and more books are being written and published and self-published consistently. There's social media where so many content creators, so many people are creating content for free. Where possible, I would say, please make an effort, if possible, to pay for the work and the learning that you are receiving from neurodivergent people, because often the difficulty that we experience in existing in a neuronormative world makes it hard for us to earn money, makes it hard for us to have a job or to have a full-time job, or to, wake during the day and sleep at night, or to not have chronic pain. There are all sorts of reasons that neurodivergent people are a lot more vulnerable and are not necessarily living the lifestyles that support our needs. So paying for information where you can is a really great thing to do. Of course, there is free information everywhere. A lot of my social medias, as often as I can, I'm writing long posts with information in it that's free and really accessible. So lean into that. Absolutely. I would say another way of informing yourself on how to take a neuro-affirming path is to access support for yourself or your children, your students, your clients, from people who are actually neuro-affirming. Now, neuro-affirming is a bit of a buzzword right now, which is one of the reasons we're doing this webinar. So you will go to a lot of websites that are like, we are trauma-informed and neuro-affirming. But then they go on to say, we do cognitive behavioral therapy, or where we do social skills development, or they might have the words ASD in there. And then all of a sudden, we know that they're saying neuro-affirming, but they're also referring to disorder. And they're also referring to behavioral changes. And if we're truly neuro-affirming, we are not seeking behavioral outcomes as a priority. Often behaviors, uh, there are behavioral changes as a byproduct of regulatory impact and self-empowerment and other things that we work towards in very beautifully neuro-affirming ways. But to aim for behavioral outcomes when you're claiming to be neuro-affirming doesn't really add up. And so that can be a clue that potentially that service provider is not or doesn't either is not neuro-affirming or doesn't quite understand what it means. Likewise, if you were here and you were a service provider, check the language on your website, check the language on your business card, your flyer, or the clinic that you work at, check their messaging. Because what we want is people to find safe service providers and be able to have ongoing relationships with them. And it's really hard when we find places and they say they're neuro-affirming and we're like, yes, it's neuro-affirming. And then we find out that it's not. And often it's not that they're like trying to trick us. It's just that we have to all independently seek this information because no one taught us this before. So everyone's working it out. So you could like have the most wonderful intentions and still the wording on your website or at your clinic could be non-neuro-affirming. So this is a really good time to just audit the language you're using. And if you are someone seeking a therapist or a service provider, really look out for those things when you're looking up who to find. Also, if you find that the more you learn about neuro-affirming practice, if you go, oh, my OT or my psych isn't actually neuro-affirming or whoever it might be, you can address this with them or you can change service providers where you have the capacity. I know there's a privilege in that. Not everyone has access to multiple people to choose from. But with the rise of online therapy, that becomes easier and easier. And so if you find that the therapy you're receiving does no longer feel neuro-affirming and you sense that that may be impacting you, it's okay to bring that up. And it's okay to change providers. I want you to know that you don't have to access early intervention or therapy. This is not to say that there is not a place for therapy, because there is. And I was a therapist for a long time, and therapists are important. And we know that we want neurodivergent people and we need neurodivergent people to access individualized care, because just because we're autistic doesn't mean we need a generic autism program, or just because we're dysgraphic doesn't mean we're going to have all the same generic needs. And so we have some dysgraphic support for you, or we have OCD support over here, or we have, again, there's a D on the end of that, but there's no other better word. Same with ADHD. We don't have anything else for it, even though there's a D on the end. Just because we're an ADHDer doesn't mean we need a generic hyperactivity program. So we do ideally want to access individualized support. And that might not mean that we need actual therapy. It might not mean that we need to go straight in, because one of the most common things that we might have all heard, I certainly heard this many times, is when you go or your child gets an assessment or you get a diagnosis and then and then they say, early intervention is key. People still say this, even though we know it's not. The reason that people say early intervention is key is because they are not neuro-affirming, because they believe that the best thing for our children is to intervene early when their brain is still so moldable. The neural pathways are like little soft little saplings. They haven't yet hardened up. It's easy to make changes. So when we say early intervention is key, we're essentially saying we want to get in there as early as possible so we can make changes, so we can get them acting less autistic. We can get them fitting in to neuronormativity. because we need to prepare them for the real world, or because that's how they won't be discriminated, or because that's how they're going to have meaningful relationships in the world. And that is not true. So yes, therapy might be needed, and also therapy might not be needed. And early intervention isn't key. If we're autistic, if we are inherently neurodivergent, so our neurodivergence is because of our neurotype, that's never going to change. So if you're on a wait list for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, please know that your child is going to be exactly the same person for the rest of their life. So this 12-month wait is not the end of the world, even though you can feel very unsupported. But their future isn't going to depend on just the therapy or the support that you're accessing through the medical model alone. And if we can really, really embody the concept of neurodiversity and really inherently believe that this is not a problem, this is not a disorder, this is not something that needs fixing, it makes it so much easier for us to slow down, pull back, really observe our child or our client or our student's needs, or our own, and then really take some time to think, how would this best be supported? And then reach for individualized care. It might be swimming lessons. That might be regulatory. That might solve a whole lot of things that are causing pain in your life. It might be leaning into a special interest. It might be accessing a mentor. There's all sorts of things that can give us the support we need that aren't just allied health services or services that are coming through the medical model. So I hope that gives you permission to slow down and to not place all our eggs in that one basket, which it's hard not to do when we're waiting for an assessment and we've got like referrals and psychs and GPs and pediatricians, telling us that we need to get onto therapy as early as possible because that's key. It can be very hard to like step off that path and navigate this neuro-affirming one when neuronormativity has us wanting to stay on this path, because neuronormativity wants us to meet the developmental milestones and wants us to learn at the correct rate and wants us to, do all the things that it requires of us so that we contribute in a particular way in the world. But it's not necessary. It's important to learn about neurodiversity through multiple neurodivergent lived experiences. So we need to learn about trans and LGBTQ plus community, their lived experience. We need to learn about the neurodivergent experience of Black people, people of color, First Nations people, Indigenous peoples, because their experience, their lived experience of neurodivergence is very different as well. We need to learn from intersectional folk. We need to learn from non-speaking folk. We need to learn about neurodivergence and therefore neurodiversity from as many different places and people as possible. Because if we only tap into the information coming through someone, potentially just say me, who might mimic your own individual experience, then that's important and great and needed, but it doesn't give us as much sense of neurodiversity as a whole, because we're not learning as much about the natural variation in brain types. We're learning about the brain type that mimics ours, or the neurodivergence that is as close as possible to ours. And when we learn about neurodiversity from as many different aspects as we can, it really helps us embody the truth of that word It really helps us go, oh, yeah, wow. It is all just so varied. There are so many different ways of being, and there's no correct one. And there are people who the life that they've been born into doesn't allow them to access a lot of the supports anyway. There are people who live in poverty, people who can't access therapy and the medical model. There are young people who aren't believed. There are people who aren't allowed to speak. There are people who are shot. There are literally people all around the world who cannot access the services and the therapies that a lot of neuronormativity are saying this is what you have to access. And when you really look and learn about neurodiversity from multiple different places and people and experiences, it helps keep you steady on that neuro-affirming path because it really helps you understand that, wow, yes, there is so many different ways of being in this world. We also need to unpack our own conditioning and ableism. So ableism is this sense of like, oh, you should be able to do that. And it's discriminatory against the disabled community. It's discrimination that's aimed at the disabled community. We all have a lot of deeply conditioned ableist beliefs. It doesn't mean we're bad people. And we can still be neuro-affirming. But we were born in a time, as I alluded to at the beginning of this session, where we were deeply embedded in behavioralism. We were brought up and we were educated by behavioralists, where we were disciplined or rewarded. It was all behavior based. Everything to do with like needs was like, how can we change this behavior? And that's because we didn't have neuroscience. All we had was behavioral science for multiple generations. So it makes sense that we have this deeply conditioned sense of, oh, that's not okay. That kind of language isn't okay. That kind of behavior isn't okay. That kind of meltdown isn't okay. That's not sharing, or that's like not considerate, or you haven't learned from what I've told you, or any of those things. We have a lot of those deeply conditioned thoughts still within us. And unpacking those and moving beyond them doesn't mean that once we know this stuff, we change. It's a constant series of trial and error. And you might sometimes find yourself saying things to your children that you don't actually believe and you wish you hadn't said because you know that it's not affirming, neuro-affirming, and you know that it's just steeped in your own past. And sometimes you'll find yourself thinking those things. And sometimes you'll find yourself thinking things that are so far opposite from what you were taught as a child that you will feel really proud of yourself and you're like, oh, it's happening. This shift is happening. And then you'll go back to saying something that you wish you hadn't have said. And I just want you to know that it's a constant trial and error. Neurodiversity affirming is not a dogma. It's not a set of rules. And you don't have to like understand what it means and then live that version. That's what we're aiming for. And that's idealist. And the reality is we're going to be wading through muck, you know? We're going to be like experiencing things that make us feel uncomfortable because we'll be like, oh, why did I say that? I don't even mean that. And that will feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. And it will give us an opportunity to communicate with the children. We will hold ableist expectations against ourselves. You know, we might be socializing and then we'll go, why did I say that? Or why am I so awkward? Or overthink it like, what if they're offended by that thing they said? What if I wasn't friendly enough? What if I didn't smile enough? That's all internalized ableism. I should be able to work faster. I should be able to work more. I should be able to get stuff done. How can I be so smart and so intelligent yet so um inconsiderate or lazy or blah blah blah? The list goes on. We say these things to ourselves all the time. And if we're neurodivergent, we've probably been saying, I'm lazy, I'm unhelpful, I'm unreliable, I'm unorganized, instead of knowing about our neurodivergence, instead of understanding our neurotype or recognizing why our neurodivergence impacts our brain, our body, and our nervous system. And instead of understanding those things, we've called ourselves lazy and unreliable because that's behavioralism and we are deeply conditioned into it. We are doing so well. Like I just want you to take a minute and realize how far we have come. We have changed so much so quickly already. And imagine when our children, who have lived completely different lives to the ones we lived, imagine what happens when they take over and they're the parents and they're the therapists and the educators and the psychologists, and they don't have to unpack all of this deeply conditioned sense of disorder because they never grew up with it. We are creating that world. And so our mistakes, when we get something wrong, when we say something wrong, when we think impatient thoughts or we resent things, they're okay because we're human. We're human. It is expected that we will think those things and feel those things and do those things. Our fear, though, around disorder can hold us back on exploring our own neurotype and our children's neurotype. It can often hold us back on accessing supports or accessing assessments, if that's something that we want to do. A lot of people use the words, I don't want my child to be labeled. And I believe that what they mean when they say that is, I don't want my child to be discriminated against. Because when someone says, I don't want my child to be labeled, they don't mean, I don't want to have more clarity around my child's needs, because no one would say that. So going for an assessment and having a diagnosis, even though that word belongs to the medical model and we don't have to adhere to the medical model, but that is still the word that exists. And so that's still the word that's used. If we are worried that a diagnosis is going to lead to our child being treated differently, what we're afraid of is discrimination. If our child is neurodivergent, or if our child is autistic or ADHD or any other neurotype, we would want to know that. It's like, when you wonder if your child's going to be right or left-handed. And then when you find out, it's so exciting. And then because then like if they're left-handed, they're going to need a left-handed guitar, or they're going to need to have not have someone sitting on that side of them because they're going to bump elbows in the classroom, or they're going to need left-handed scissors. Automatically we can just put very simple accommodations in place to cater for that. Many years ago, left-handedness was seen as a bad thing and it was suppressed, and people were forced to write with their right hands. And those people developed traumas. That is what has happened now with autism, for example. And that is what we are breaking out of. So that's a really nice parallel, the analogy about handedness. If we weren't afraid of discrimination, I believe that we would all be accessing clarity around our neurotypes, because understanding our needs and our children's needs just gives us so much information about who we are. Of course, being neuro-affirming does not mean you have to explore your neurotype. It does not mean that you have to get an assessment or have a diagnosis or self-identify or have an official identification of anything. You can still be neurodiversity affirming, understanding that Your needs are what they are. Your child's needs are specific to them. The whole world is just a varying degree of different brains with different needs. And you can accommodate those and deeply accept those and accept other people's needs as well without having to step foot into the medical model. So being neurodiversity affirming doesn't alter whether you access a medical or pathological path or not. That is individual and based on your needs. Um, I want to acknowledge that for those of us who are inherently neurodivergent, so our neurotype is neurodivergent, it's not just us, it's many people in our family because neurotypes are genetically inherited. So if our child is receiving a diagnosis of ADHD, for example, then there's one or two parents that are neurodivergent. There are siblings, aunties, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and often the extended family, especially if they're older than us, do not always understand uh, our neurotypes. Because if we're deeply conditioned, think about how deeply conditioned the older generations in our family are, who may be autistic or ADHD, but had to suppress their traits, suppress their needs, suppress their stims, act like they could fit in to neuronormativity. So it can be very triggering and it can cause relational tensions in families when children or anyone, whoever it is, starts getting diagnosis and we start to recognize it throughout the family. I just I want to mention that because sometimes it can be tricky for us to stay on a neuro-affirming path when other people in our extended family, including often our partner, this is very common. I have people coming to me for consultations all the time where one wants to seek an assessment and the other does not believe in it or doesn't think it's necessary because that's what they all do in their family, which of course it is because it's all genetic. So it can be hard to stay on a neuro-affirming path when not all of the very close and important people on your life or in your life are on that path or agree with it. So, and there is no answer to that other than you are not alone. I'm running out of time. Lean into the nuance I've written down here. What that means is many truths can exist. And one person's neuro-affirming pathway doesn't have to look like another person's neuro-affirming pathway. So, like I said at the beginning, there is no dogma, there's no rule book. And if you see anyone online going, this is the rule book for how to be neuro-affirming, or these are the 40 steps, this is the 20-step strategy for neuro-affirming practice, then you know that it's not neuro-affirming. Because, in fact, if they're giving you strategies, it's not neuro-affirming because a strategy is designed to change something. If we're changing things, if we're aiming for outcomes that are steeped in a perceived positive outcome, I can almost guarantee you that the perceived positive outcome is something that is considered to be expected by neuronormativity. It's very rare that the strategy is going to lead us to actualize as autistic. The strategy is almost always going to have us doing something that is perceived as better by neuronormative structures. So if someone is telling you there's a rule book or this is right or this is wrong, or these are the strategies, this is the 20-point chart for how to be neuro-affirming in the classroom, they don't understand neuro-affirming approach. Because it is, I believe anyway, that it is literally to do with seeking information that changes the shape of the information you already have, being open and vulnerable to go, oh, I could have been thinking about that incorrectly, or maybe I should change, or maybe that wasn't great. So being vulnerable enough to go, oh, I've got stuff to learn and I've got stuff to let go of, unlearn. How did I get onto that? So neurodiversity, it's about, I believe, this is what I want to say. I believe that a neuro-affirming approach is about learning and allowing the shape to change without having to go, right, after I do this webinar, I'm going to go take notes, I'm going to take a day to integrate, and then next week, my approach is going to be neuro-affirming. No, it's not about the doing, it's about the being. So as you become more and more neuro-affirming just by embodying the truth of the neurodiversity paradigm, your ways will shift. They will alter. So this isn't a practical step by step of what to do. This is an unpacking and a growth. This is like an expansion of who you are and what you believe. And I feel that that is the truest way to walk a neuro-affirming path. I would say let's let go of shame and guilt. We have a lot of it. If we are neurodivergent, we're already feeling shame and guilt for not fitting into neuronormativity. We might be feeling shame and guilt for succeeding too much. We might be feeling shame and guilt for being too big, having too much energy, being too hyperactive, like being too much for people. We might have guilt or shame about not being the kind of parent we want to be, that we have special interests or hyperfixations on building our businesses or gardening or having some hobby or gaming. And we feel guilty because our hyperfixation or our deepest desire isn't homesteading or uh, all of these things that we have in our head based on what neuronormativity has shown us is the ideal. We are more likely to hold guilt and shame and a distorted sense of self based on us not necessarily fitting those stereotypes. But the thing is, we don't need to fit the stereotypes. We don't want to fit the stereotypes. Someone made up all the stereotypes. They're not real things. And neuronormativity isn't like an actual thing that we have to be part of. Someone made up all the rules. Someone made up the expectations, and they were made up so that we could comply and contribute in the world in a certain way. And so when we actively divest from that, uh, even that can bring us a sense of shame. Even the unmasking, a lot of people, another thing I'm having a lot of sessions with people about lately is them unmasking or just leaning into their authenticity, taking agency of who they are and actualizing rather than pretending or playing small. And that brings a lot of feelings as well. I would say let's aim for neutrality. So we don't have to feel positive. We don't have to feel empowered. We don't have to feel like liberated because divesting from the mainstream or divesting from everything we've previously been taught, especially when we're doing it on behalf of our children or for our children, it can be frightening. So if you feel frightened or if you feel shame, it's okay to be neutral about that. And by neutral, I don't mean don't feel frightened, don't feel angry, don't feel resentful, don't not feel anything. Because all of the emotions are human experiences. And if we are truly neuro-affirming, we believe in them all. So no matter what you're feeling, and I really hope this gives you a sense of freedom, a sense of ease around this, because this isn't something that you have to just know how to do and get right. You will feel your way down this path and it will feel frightening and you will feel like you're doing it wrong and you'll wonder like, is this actually the best thing for my child? Or is this actually the best thing for myself? And if you think all those things and feel all those things, let's be neutral about it. It's okay to feel those things. And on that note, we don't have to make our neurodivergence sound like a superpower because I think that is the same thing. Essentially, if we're saying our kid's ADHD is their superpower or my autism is my superpower, it's okay if you believe it's your superpower, but if we're saying this on behalf of others, often the underlying reason we're doing that is because we want it to sound better than what we actually think it is. Because if we were truly neurodiversity affirming and we truly believed that there was no better brain than any other, then we would not feel the need to bump it up to make it seem something a bit more special or to seem more positive. So we don't need to be calling it a superpower or any of those other sort of affirming words we're often using to try and help people feel good about themselves. We don't have to have a relationship with our brain that is one of joy and celebration. It's okay if we don't. We might always have a checkered relationship with our brain, and that's okay. Accepting our brain and accepting our children's brains and knowing that it is to be expected that all of us, all around the world, no matter what culture we're from, no matter our religion, no matter anything, all the brains will be different. And so accepting that and honoring that and working out how to individually support each of the different brains is our aim. No generalized care, no stereotypical care. It also doesn't mean you have to not accept medical or pathological care. Well, if we're neuro-affirming, we do not believe that our brains are pathological, but we may have co-occurring conditions that require medical support. And so we can be neurodiversity affirming and still accept medical support. So nothing about this says you can't do that, you can't do that, you have to do it this way. This is what I mean by the neuro-affirming path is not a dogma. It's a belief system. And I also want to say that we can only be neuro-affirming as the safety of the community that we live in will allow us to be. Some people like me have a lot of safety. And it's okay for me to evolve and unmask and divest from neuronormativity. And it's okay for my children to do that as well in lots of ways. But not everyone in the world has that privilege. For some people, unmasking or not taking into consideration safety and the need to conform in certain ways to certain rules for our safety, that is necessary. And so it's a privilege to be able to walk this neuro-affirming path. And please know that you don't have to be, however you do it, for where you're at right now and for whatever is safe for you is enough. And the further you walk down this path, the further expansion that will happen. And I'm not talking about personal transformation or like development or anything like that. I'm just talking about like an unraveling of the old and I really can only think of it as a changing the shape of your belief system. You will find that over time, when you look back to the things you used to say or do a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, you'll realize how more deeply you've embodied this sense of the neurodiversity paradigm. And when we live that way, we are, by definition, being neuro-affirming. Thank you. Let's just take a moment because that is just such important. It is such important work, like what we've just spoken about, and what I feel very thrilled about is that this doesn't come with a manual. This doesn't come with like an answer. We don't have to now tap into the strategies. Like actually just learning about what this means is the work and deeply believing it is the work. And I feel like that's a breath of relief. That's a big sigh out for me. And now let's take your questions. Now, also, I know. Oh, there's no chat. Oh, no one got the chat box. No one got the chat box. That's why I couldn't see it. Well, now I'm going to have to scroll through the Q&A to see where the questions are. But I wanted to say, I know a lot of you are here because you're joining the 6-week course, Autism, Dispelling the Myths and Understanding the Culture. And part of my promise was anyone who registered for this program, which is why there's not so many here, but so many hundreds of people registered, is because that they wanted to use that discount code. So before I start the quick Q&A, I'm going to quickly put the code. Oh, there's no chat box. I can't even put it in the chat box. Okay, I'm going to put it in the Q&A box. Oh, how do I even do that? I can't see it. All right, well, the code is ALLI20. So ALLI, all capitals, 20, because that discount code is going to give you 20% off the cost of the 6-week program, Autism, Dispelling the Myths and Understanding the Culture. Please know it's very relevant, not just for autistic people. All of the information and the content really speaks to all sorts of neurodivergences, especially ADHD, because there's so much overlap. Right, everyone's just saying there's no chat box. Judy Singer lied. We know that Judy Singer has been problematic in recent years. So I referenced Judy Singer as the person who coined neurodiversity. I know that there was a whole community involved in that work, and Judy Singer is the one who has been accredited as coining the term. Also, in recent years, she's made some extremely problematic comments around neurodivergent folk, which I won't bring up here because it's not trauma informed to do that. But Judy Singer still is attributed to neurodiversity, and it's still important that we use the term neurodiversity because it's a term broader than Judy, and she doesn't own it. And it was a whole community of people who came up with that concept together because they all felt that they were being underrepresented and needed that definition to exist. Marnie says, how do we get this info in front of school staff? Well, I do a lot of these kinds of seminars at schools. So firstly, if you want to email me or get your school to have me over for a PD, I'm up for it. And until there is some kind of regulation around the access of this kind of information, until it's necessary, and until schools and training facilities actually require people to have this information, I think it's going to remain tricky to get it to people. Because like I touched on at the very beginning of this, to access information about neuro-affirming frameworks and the neurodiversity paradigm, we have to independently seek it because no one was told about it. If you don't know about it, you don't know. There are some people who know about it, but they're like, oh, well, oh, that's too hard. We're just going to keep managing, trying to manage, trying to cope. We don't have capacity to change. So there are a lot of people who are aware and aren't taking that information on. But a lot of it is just that people still genuinely don't know about this information or know that they need to know this information. So until this kind of a talk becomes really mainstream, it's going to be hard to have it in front of school staff. I will say I have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who access my work, and a lot of them are teachers and educators. And so I know that there are a lot of incredible educators out there personally paying for and accessing their own professional development, doing it on the weekends, doing it overnight, doing it by themselves off their own bat because they are seeking a neuro-affirming approach and they are seeking that and wanting that for your children as well. So please remind yourself of that the snowball is growing, the ripple effect is rippling. The information is spreading, but as far as getting it in front of schools, it's still just a step-by-step process. So informing them of this is a good first step. So I've got a question here. What about an autistic psychologist that also offers neuro-affirming therapy, but also offers CBT for clients, including neuronormative clients? So that is in their info details for possible modalities they may use depending on client. Would that be a complete red flag? No. So I never really, there's not many things that I ever take as a definite, complete red flag. I always like to look at the nuance. So if you can see that their language is neuro-affirming and they're also offering DBT, or they talk about actualizing, supporting autistic people to actualize. If they still have words like that, and they offer CBT, because there are places and people, and even though CBT is largely outdated now, and a lot of people would, not recommend that anymore. And a lot of it is we're cognitive behavioral therapy. We're trying to like tell ourselves to change. So for neurodivergent people, this can be really non-neuro-affirming. And it can also be unsafe. And there's all sorts of reasons why it's not recommended that neurodivergent people access CBT. But somebody offering CBT doesn't necessarily just on its own mean it's a red flag. So yes, I would say take all the clues, look at the nuance, look at the way that their language is and what they offer, because there's nothing inherently wrong with CBT within a broader context. As a speech pathologist, I find it difficult for children who've been diagnosed as autistic in early childhood and access multiple therapies of the medical model when they are 7, 8, 9 years old, and whose parents bring them to therapy each week, yet don't use language like autism, which allows us to lean into all the wonderful neuro-affirming ways to support the child. Some people may just never use the terms, I guess. The more I learn of people with lived experience, the better I can support. Thank you. Thank you for commenting on that. I also find this tricky. I know that I know neuro-affirming language. I use neuro-affirming language about myself, my children, and I assume neuro-affirming language for people who haven't indicated the kind of language they use to identify for themselves or their children. But when you have children coming to therapy with you who say, I have autism, or you have parents who say, my ASD kid or whatever, it's not our job to tell them they're wrong because that's not neuro-affirming. And if someone identifies their neurodivergence with you and they're using a term that's pathological in nature, it's not our place to correct them either. It's our place to follow their lead. And we use whatever word they have used to identify their neurodivergence with you. And I think that what we can be doing is planting little seeds. So in the greater context of the work we're doing with them, we can be using neuro-affirming language, and we can be planting seeds for words that they may not know about yet. They may always say things like on the spectrum because they don't know that it's okay to say autism. And so when we plant little seeds and when we model a neuro-affirming way and neuro-affirming languaging, that is also helping this like ripple, the ripple effect. And as I said, a lot of parents are scared of, for example, the word autism. When we were growing up, autism was not something that was celebrated, and autistic people were discriminated, and there weren't as many opportunities. And it can be very hard for us to unpack that and remove any deeply embedded fear that we have for our child based on our own lived experience, our own deeply conditioned experience from our own childhood. So when parents are not using neuro-affirming language, It can be, firstly, because they've never heard it. They don't know any different. And secondly, it can be because they're trying to keep life as safe and affirming as they can within the perception of what they know about. And so it is tricky. And I just encourage us all to continue using neuro-affirming languages and approach in our frameworks and know that we're planting seeds. Ali 20, is it capitals? Thank you everybody for putting the code in the chat box, in the Q&A. Yes, it is Ali 20, all capitals, ALLI 20. So let me tell you a bit about the program. Autism, Dispelling the Myths and Understanding the Culture is a 6-week version of what we've done here, but not just on this topic. It's separate to what we've talked about here. Each week you get a series of pre-recorded videos that I just sit in this exact spot and I'm very casual and I make mistakes and I don't edit them out. And I've got my cup of tea and I'm just sitting here chatting like what I'm doing now, but the videos are shorter. But I will send you 2 or 3 videos each week, but they're shorter and easier to get through. You don't have to dedicate an hour to them. And then each Thursday for 6 weeks, we have a Q&A like this, but it goes for an hour. And all questions are welcome. And so throughout this 6 weeks, there's a real opportunity to deepen our understanding of the neurodiversity paradigm, which helps us be neuro-affirming in approach. It's not about practicing strategies. It's about changing our mind frames. It's a really, really beautiful, I think it's the needed next step after what I call Autism 101, ADHD 101, Neurodivergence 101. You know, if we're leaning into information that is teaching us what we now know about the brain, the next step is to lean into information about how we frame work or how we reframe our deeply conditioned beliefs about the brain. And for anyone who's here who already was a member of this program the first time it ran, you don't have to re-register. You still have lifetime access. You all have lifetime access as soon as you register. So you don't have to keep up. You don't have to do it this 6 weeks. It starts next week. You don't have to do it with me. You can do it in your own time. And everything will be recorded and you'll have access to it all. Thank you for acknowledging the privilege of being able to follow a neuro-affirming path. My own lived experience has been met instead with punishment and re-traumatization. And this is just so important to understand. And this is why it is so important to learn from multiple neurodivergent people, people with different experiences to mine, people who it literally is unsafe for, people in abusive relationships and violent situations where they are punished or suppressed. There are so many reasons as to why people can't openly walk this neuro-affirming path, even if we can deepen ourselves into it from a relational and internal framework perspective. Sometimes it can be very, very unsafe or difficult for us to actualize that openly in the world. And that does not mean that you are not neuro-affirming. It means you are doing everything you can to keep safe. And that is the first priority always. How do I best communicate and educate my child's school around neuro-affirming practice? There is so little professional development around neurodivergent children, which is wild. This goes back to the question I answered before. Really, I think it's about planting seeds. I think it's about having relational safety, which is something that we talk a lot about in neuro-affirming work. It's based on relational safety. Therapy used to be about meeting therapeutic goals and doing strategies to meet goals. What we now focus on is creating relational safety to impact regulatory experience. So creating safety between us and our clients, us and our children, us and the teachers, us and the service providers, so that we can have as safe and regulated an experience as possible. Because when we feel safe, connected, or even loved and valued by these people that we're accessing support from or education from, our capacity to learn, engage, interact, it's all going to be so much higher. So if you can develop a connection with the people that you want to learn this information with, so that you feel safe enough to say, this is what I've learned about neuro-affirming approach, the neuro-affirming approach, or if you feel then safe enough to make a meeting with the teacher and say, this is how we are approaching supporting with our child, that is going to inform your capacity for making change. So creating connections with staff at schools is the most important foundation for then leading them towards information like this. And a lot of schools are already accessing. You could start by asking if they are accessing neuro-affirming professional development. And if they go, oh, we really wanted to, but we just don't know where to get it, you can say, well, I know this person, Allison Davies, and get them to email me. Nicole says, Judy didn't coin the term. It was community-led. Absolutely. Thank you for putting the link in there. Ali, thank you for your voice and compassion within this space. Where to start if school isn't neuro-affirming? And all about the behavioral paradigm. Often schools are not neuro-affirming. And that is because they're big places led by systems. Often workplaces aren't neuro-affirming for the same reason. The smaller and the more grassroots a community or a space is, the easier it is to embed neuro-affirming approaches within it. So within your family, just say you have a family of 3 or 4, it's going to be easier to embed neuro-affirming approaches. If you've got a school of 800 and it's led by the education department and it's governed by government and funding and all sorts of neuronormative systems, it's going to be way harder to create a neuro-affirming space. And that is not always testament to the principal, the leadership team, the staff, because there are incredible teachers out there and teachers' aides and educators doing the most incredible work and highly neuro-affirming, incredibly efficient models, teaching us a lot. And they can still be working in a system that is non-neuro-affirming inherently. So a lot of schools won't be. And ideally, if we can look at the varying options of schooling, homeschooling and unschooling, and alternative education options like Steiner and Waldorf and whatnot are not always possible for everyone, but those options do exist. And they're worth looking into if they feel like they would be a good fit for you and your needs. Changing schools can be an option that works. This is something that I have, and actually, this is a great example. One of my children switched schools, and the school that they started off at was wonderful, and the staff were wonderful, and the accommodations made for my child were exactly what was needed. But there were other factors in the school that just made it not as regulatory for him. And it was to do with the size of the classes and the different expectations. And when we moved to a farm school, very small school, where everything was quite different, it just accommodated the needs in a way that was better for my child. So trialing different schools, different settings. I would say if your child is not going to school, if they're experiencing school can't, which is probably what used to be called school refusal, School refusal is not a word we use. It's not neuro-affirming because it is suggesting that the child is choosing not to go, refusing to go. It's behavioral, it's defiant, it's oppositional. Uh, Children will go to school if they can. And if they aren't going, it's because they can't, because their body, their brain, and their nervous system is saying, this place is overwhelming. This place is confusing. This place doesn't feel safe. This place is where I get distressed, all of those things. So if your child is not going to school, we talk a lot about this in the 6-week program, the first goal, I would say, is not to say, what can we do to get them back at school? The goal is to say, what can I do to help them feel safe? Because it all comes down to regulation and felt safety in the body. And so that is too big a question for a Q&A, but that's the foundation of it. And we unpack that deeply in the 6-week program. My son has retained primitive reflexes. Is this term under the disorder category? I don't believe so. Oh, well, it's called neuromotor immaturity. I mean, the word immaturity is comparing it to something that they would probably consider mature. So essentially, it's not a neuro-affirming word, but the understanding of retained primitive reflexes isn't inherently ableist in itself, no. So sometimes it's the need, the neurodivergence, the thing that we experience, the difference, the disability, those things aren't non-neuro-affirming or problematic. It's often the word given to describe it or the term. And maybe immaturity, the word neuromotor immaturity is reflecting of non-affirming pathological stance, but in itself, obviously the needs there are very valid. Do you have contacts that are psychologists or counselors that are sound, and can you give their contact details out? I don't do this because the only people I can really know for sure and recommend are psychologists and counselors that I personally use. And I've never felt really comfortable giving my own sort of healthcare practitioners' details out publicly, just for my own sort of privacy, I guess. But there are places where you can go and find lists of neuro-affirming support and service providers. And I can't think of the names of them right now. I can't think of the names of these places. But if you look up neuro-affirming service providers or um, like something along those lines, if you do a bit of Googling, you will find where neurodivergent-led organizations have compiled lists of those kinds of people. So I'm sorry I can't think of the names of them off the top of my head, but you will find them if you do a little bit of searching. I'm a practitioner who works with children who are neurodiverse. Parents are often so concerned and worried for their children, and to assist parents with their worries and to highlight a child's strengths, I do talk about their child having a superpower. I actually do believe that these children are amazing, and it flips a parent's concerns, particularly in a deficit medical model. Yeah, I understand the reasoning behind that. I would probably add that I feel if giving them a sense of a real positive word like a superpower can bring them to a place of neutrality, that's the ideal. Because what this person's saying here in their comment is that these parents are so concerned, so worried, so anxious that they're already in this place of like stewing over potential negative, potential fear, potential discrimination, concern for their well-being. So to sort of like help them shift, they are using words like it's superpowers. And I absolutely love the word strength because that is exactly what it is. And I do understand why a lot of people like to identify as it being a superpower because different aspects of our neurodivergence can actually elevate us to heights that are just beyond, like, well, there's a lot of people in the world who are neurodivergent who are like the richest people, all the richest people probably. The startups, the tech bros, the app developers, the famous Hollywood actors and all of the people who are really able to hyperfixate on their passion and create incredible things that think outside of the square and produce incredible things. There is so much capacity. Um, But I think where it can become problematic is when we don't feel like we have a superpower. So if a child is struggling, is is shut down or in survival mode or is lonely or is feeling like they don't fit in or belong and their parents are saying this is a superpower, there can be a disconnect there in terms of the reality of what they're feeling and the description of the words other people are using about it. So that is the place where I would be like wanting to make sure that that doesn't develop. But there's no wrongs in this. So highlighting a child's strengths by using superpower is not a wrong. And it's different in all contexts as well. I offer lots of training and I want to know how, as a provider, we can offer more individualized ways of supporting mainstream assessment. Oh, thank you for this comment and question. I haven't read the rest of it yet because this is so needed. Assessments are so tricky on so many levels. But also, how to make it possible for us as a provider to be personalized as it's going to presumably take more time. I want to do this, but I'm concerned about how to do it based on limited resources. I've had many people reach out to me lately saying that they are only offering neuro-affirming trauma-informed assessments, which means it costs more, it takes more time, there are more sessions involved because they don't access any of the tricky and emotional, vulnerable information until there's already been um, a safe therapeutic relationship developed. And there are many people out there who are willing to and able to pay more and take up that option. Of course, everyone is not so lucky that they can do that. But I think making that option available, even though it does take more time and does cost more, creating the option for that for the people who can access it is a beautiful thing. So I think there's a lot to be said for leaning into this uh, increased focus on trauma-informed safe processes in a mainstream assessment. I think it's very important. If you are working within a system that doesn't allow that, then all you can do is be as neuro-affirming in your approach as you can within the restraints that you have. If you are unable to leave that job or unable to consult with the clinic and say, how do we make this more trauma-informed? Or if you're unable to have power over any of those processes, you can only do what you can do within that system. And therefore, if you are delivering mainstream assessments, that doesn't create space for people to feel safe with you before you delve in. Just naming that up at the beginning and saying this process is not trauma informed and it could be hard. And it might feel like I'm asking you things that are extremely intimate that you would not want someone to know, especially that someone that you don't know and that you don't know yet whether you can trust me. And so I just want you to know that I'm aware of that and I want to make this as easy as possible for you, or whatever wording you would use. I think at least acknowledging that within the confines you have, um, and holding space for people when they are delivering information around their children, because when parents are doing assessments on behalf of their children, they are sharing their children's private, intimate, personal details without their children's consent. And it is very traumatic. And so, even in a mainstream assessment model where it doesn't necessarily feel like it's neuro-affirming, if you can be holding space for the delivery of that information rather than just rushing through it or not recognizing how tricky it can be, I think all of those things are neuro-affirming. What would you see as the best treatment if you wanted to use Western medical model? I don't think there is a best treatment. There are lots of different treatments that work for different needs. I don't think ABA-based or applied behavioral analysis-based behavioral therapies are good in any instance. So I don't ever think that that would be, they're certainly not a neuro-affirming option, no matter the context. So they're the therapies where people are going to therapy up to 40 hours a week, and they're doing behavioral-based work. Other than that, within neuro-affirming supports, I don't know if there is any that are better than others. I really like somatic psychotherapy. I really like counseling. I really like psychology. I love OT and music therapy and speech pathology. Um, I love medication. It's not something I have any of my own lived experience with, but as a parent, I do. And uh, important to note that you can be neuro-affirming and still access medication. So you don't have to be either or with stuff like this. If you're accessing supports that are individualized for your needs or your child's needs, and they're supporting you to feel safer, to be able to actualize rather than hide yourself or mask or shut down or assimilate, anything that is supporting you to be a fuller version of who you are or your child is a treatment. I mean, I can't think of any that I should like not be recommending other than ABA. So yeah, there's no real answer to that question. I have gone a bit over time. So thank you for all of the questions. Oh, there's heaps more. I would never get through them all. Thank you so many. Thank you so much for putting your questions here. If you do have more information that you want to glean through me, through this kind of format, please consider joining the 6-week program. It opened tonight. Alli 20, ALLI, all capitals, 20 is your code to get 20% off that. It's a $450 program, which is undervalued for a 6-week program with lifetime content and 6 live Q&As with me. You get a 6-hour PD certificate for your work needs. You have access to it forever. There's a lot of bonus content in there as well. The conversations that come up in the Q&As are so robust and so thought-provoking, and it is an incredible community. I'm very proud of this program. And if you are someone who has done Brains Equal Behaviors or heard of Brains Equal Behaviors, which was my, I guess, signature program, this is like the necessary next step. So this is something I would really suggest being part of to deepen yourself on this path. There's a payment plan. We start next week. If you have any questions, no matter how small, please don't hesitate to email me. If you're watching this back, like in a year's time, this might not even be available. Just be discerning if somehow this recording has just come by your path like in years to come and this program isn't happening. Just know that it was happening and you missed out. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a lovely rest of the night and asleep, and be gentle on yourselves. Okay. Bye. Mwah. I always do that. I always kiss you, even though I don't know you. Okay.